for a couple seconds past time. So we'll go ahead and get started. We're continuing our study through the Gospel of Luke. This morning we'll be looking at Luke chapter 21, the rest of the chapter where we left off on Wednesday. But before we dive into that, I've asked Caleb if he would to say a prayer.
Our Heavenly Father, we come to you now this morning, truly blessed to be here, gathered with our church family, and opening up Luke and studying your word. We pray that you'll be with us in the study as we reflect on Jesus' final moments before his crucifixion. We're grateful for his love for us and the sacrifice that made our hope that we have possible, and have the relationships that we have here and with you. Pray that you'll be with Josh as he presents the things that he's prepared, and pray that our hearts will be open and that we will be encouraged. We love you, we thank you for your love, and we pray this in his name. Amen.
All right. So Luke chapter 21, 5 through 38. And its companion passages in Matthew chapter 24 and Mark chapter 13. What's the overall point that's being discussed?
Destruction of the temple.
Yeah, the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, like the days of vengeance that are coming upon the people. And I think it's important to keep in context that that's what's ultimately being discussed here, because there's a lot of different interpretations, different viewpoints on these particular passages. But Jesus' point up to this time, has been journeying towards Jerusalem, him keeping his eyes, his focus on the goal, and he's been teaching his disciples to do the exact same thing. Right, Luke chapter 6:40. Disciple is not above his master. When he is perfectly trained, he will be like him. So whatever Jesus is doing himself, he's asking his disciples to do as well, so they might ultimately become and be like him. So Jesus kept his eye on the goal, which was getting towards Jerusalem and fulfilling the things that were written of him there. And so he's telling his followers here in this particular passage to really do the same thing. Keep your eyes on the goal. Keep your eyes on the prize. He said that back in chapter 16, we talked about it with the parable of the unjust steward, if you recall, and he was talking about how even worldly people have the concept or the framework to think ahead. Right? That unjust steward, even though he did things that were a little shady, he was doing it in a way that was preparing for his tomorrow. Right? And Jesus' point was the sons of this world are more shrewd than the sons of light in terms of thinking ahead. So you all, as sons of light, as sons of enlightenment, another way to say it, ought to be preparing and thinking ahead. And so in large part, what's happening here in Luke chapter 21 is Jesus telling his disciples to be prepared, to be watchful, to be thinking ahead, so that when these things occur, they'll be ready and know exactly what to do and how to handle it. Let's go ahead and just get started and dive right into it. We left off, the first 4 verses of chapter 21. This is kind of why we broke it out. Really goes well with the previous section where first 4 verses of 21 talk about the widow and her deposit and tithing, giving this relatively small amount of money, but in terms of what it meant to her, it was everything that she had. And I think another piece that was kind of interesting to pick up in that is Jesus sees what she does. It's not lost on Jesus what this woman is doing, and it means a lot to him, so it should mean a lot to us, because it meant everything to her. But that went as kind of a contrast with the scribes and the Pharisees that he condemns in the previous section. So really, starting in verse 5, even though we're in the temple, it starts a new talking point. So verse 5, it says, "Then as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations, he said, 'These things which you see, the days will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another that will not be thrown down.' So they asked him, saying, 'Teacher, but when will these things be? And what sign will there be when these things are about to take place?'" So we're in the temple, and they're speaking about what? They've seen a woman give her money. They're in the temple, and they're looking around, just kind of taking it all in. And what do they decide to speak about? Got to highlight it, it's not a secret question. Yeah, they're speaking about the temple. Yeah, how impressive this temple is, and it really was a beautiful thing to behold. Josephus actually states in one of his works, The War of the Jews, in Book 1, Chapter 21, this is accordingly on the 15th year of his reign, Herod, that's Herod the Great, rebuilt the temple and encompassed a piece of land about it with a wall, which land was twice as large as that before enclosed. The expenses that he laid out upon it were vastly large also, and the riches about it were unspeakable, a sign of which you have in the great cloisters, which is that's like the passageways that you would walk through, that were erected about the temple, and the citadel, which is on the north side. The cloisters he built from the foundation, but the citadel he repaired at vast expense. Nor was it other than a royal palace, which he called Antonia in honor of Anthony. So Josephus is here talking about the great expense that went into the restoration of the temple. If you recall, the temple in its glory in the days of Solomon was a beautiful thing to behold, but it was destroyed by who? Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, they came in and ransacked it. And then when the people come back under Zerubbabel, they start to, and Ezra and Nehemiah, right, they start to do the rebuilding project. But what happens when they lay the foundation of the new temple that they're building? It stops. Well, what was their viewpoint of it? Or thoughts about the grandeur of this temple that they're making? Yeah, it wasn't quite up to snuff, but up to par with how the old one was. But now this new version that Herod has erected is exceedingly grand. It talks about him building this wall, and I think Brad showed some pictures last time about this. The court of the Gentiles, which was the courtyard around the outside of the whole Temple Mount. How vast of an actual campus it was. We often think about it just in terms of like a small football field sized place, but it was a massive thing when you took into account the court of the Gentiles around on the outside. And it was the height of Jerusalem. It was this spectacle to behold. It was this. Jerusalem itself was the city set on a hill, and the temple itself was on the peak of that. And Josephus talking about the massive amounts of expense that Herod put into making it as impressive as it was. Another quote from Josephus in the same work said, "Now the outward face of the temple in its front wanted nothing that was likely to surprise either men's minds or their eyes, for it was covered all over with plates of gold of great weight, and at the first rising of the sun reflected back a view fiery splendor, and made those who forced themselves to look upon it to turn their eyes away, just as they would have done at the sun's own rays. This temple appeared to strangers when they were coming at it from a distance like a mountain covered with snow. For as to those parts of it that were not gilt, they were exceedingly white. For its top it had spikes with sharp points to prevent any pollution of it by birds sitting on it. Of its stones, some of them were 45 cubits in length, 5 in height, and 6 in breadth." So it was this massive thing. It was this massive thing, but it had white marble slabs all around it, or in some plates of gold, so that, as Josephus records, you couldn't look at it when the sun was hitting it directly, because it would just reflect the light. That it was just too awesome to behold. Just like looking at the sun, it was just too bright. Or when visitors would come upon it, they'd never seen anything before, they'd think they were looking at a snow-capped mountain because of how pure and pristine it looked. And they put these gold spikes on the top of it that would, like you see like at a gas station sign, those little spikes to keep the birds from making nests on it and whatnot. So they made these gold spikes on it so the birds couldn't even sit in places to pollute it, to take away some of that purity of which it seemed to exemplify. So it was this grand thing. And so the disciples here are talking about just how grand this is. Look at this, how impressive of a thing this is, this dedication that we have to God, this house of God that we have in our midst. And what does Jesus respond?
tell him when he won't see you anymore.
Yeah, don't get too used to it, right? Yeah, there's a day coming when everything that you see here, right, all this grandeur, everything that you're seeing is not going to be there anymore. There's not going to be one stone that's left on top of another that's not thrown down. And so, what's their response?
When and what do we look for?
Yeah, when, first question, and what sign will there be? Now, I think the first thing that's kind of interesting, it's not the first time that Jesus has talked about the destruction of Jerusalem thus far in the gospel that we've studied back in chapter 12, 13, 17, 19. He's alluded to it and referenced it already several times. So I think it's interesting that, after they're talking about how grand this is, and then he says, yeah, it's going away. And do they seem perplexed by that? No, they're just kind of like, oh, okay. When and what's kind of the signpost? What's going to be kind of a leading indicator that these things are about to take place? Now, if you contrast that with Jesus has just gotten to Jerusalem. So back in chapter 19, when Brad talked about and he led us in with the triumphal entry to Jerusalem, there's immediately a conflict. And where does that conflict take place? So as Jesus comes into town, there's a conflict. Where does it happen first?
Refer to the conflict in the temple?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you could say the Pharisees are crying out when they're coming in. But after he gets in, the first thing that happens is he cleanses the temple, right? What did that involve? Getting down his hands and knees and scrubbing the dirty parts where those birds managed to get. What was the cleansing of the temple?
Just driving out all the people who were selling things, the changers,
Yeah.
knocking over tables.
Knocking over tables, people that were selling things, profiteering, exchanging money to change the currency of the day for temple currency, and inflated exchange rates. I mean, all these crazy things. But what's Jesus say when he's doing that? Chapter.
You've made this place a house, or the numbers.
Yeah, chapter 19, verse 46. It is written, "My house is a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." Does anybody know what that's in reference to? Where that quote is from? Not Isaiah. Close. You're close. What's that? Yeah, Jeremiah chapter 7, right? And Jeremiah chapter 7, if you want to turn over there, it's an interesting thing to study and look at. But basically, God tells Jeremiah, I want you to go preach a sermon. And where I want you to do it is on the entryway into the temple. Okay, well, what's the subject matter of this sermon? I want you to tell all the people how awful they are. And so, they're thinking about this. He's standing on the entrance to the temple. They're going to church. One of the greeters out here saying, thanks for coming. You're really bad. You know how you are. And so that's what God is calling on Jeremiah to do here in chapter 7. Preach this sermon and tell the people the error of their ways. And the error of their ways, essentially, if you're looking in Jeremiah chapter 7, as it might help if I did as well. Verse 4, it says, "Do not trust in these lying words, saying, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these. For if you thoroughly amend your ways and your doings, if you thoroughly execute judgment between a man and his neighbor, you do not oppress the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, and you do not shed innocent blood in this place, or walk after other gods to your hurt, then I will cause you to dwell in this place, in the land that I gave to your forefathers forever and ever. Behold, you trust in lying words that cannot profit." Those lying words that cannot profit are the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. They think because we've got this, because we have access to it and access to God, that's what's ultimately going to save us because we're here close to it. But he goes on to say, it's doing these things that God actually wants from you that is what is meaningful to him. He says in verse 9, "But you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, burn incense to Baal, walk after other gods whom you do not know, and then you come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, well, we're delivered from all these abominations because we've got the temple, right? Has this house which is called by my name become a den of thieves in your eyes? Behold, I, even I, have seen it, says the Lord. And then he goes on to, kind of like a rallying cry, essentially, remember remember the Alamo. He says, remember Shiloh. Don't think that just because this is the temple, because it bears my name, that I won't wipe it out. And that's what you're resting your trust and your faith on. I can take it away tomorrow. I will take it away. But you're resting your hope on it. You do whatever you want to do. You live however you want to live, but then you come back here like everything's okay just because you've got this. And so he's condemning them for that and saying, remember what happened to Shiloh. And Jeremiah, his whole preaching throughout his entire life is the coming destruction because of what they missed. If Isaiah's message was wake up and pay attention, Jeremiah's message was you didn't pay attention and now it's too late. And so the temple is ultimately going to be destroyed, and that's what Jeremiah is calling out. And so Jesus even references it as soon as he gets into Jerusalem, references a Jeremiah passage talking about the destruction of the temple that they seem to hold in such high esteem just because it is what it is, but ultimately they've missed the point over and over again. So he calls that out as soon as he gets into town. You've made this temple a den of thieves. So he's already kind of setting the stage for what he's going to be talking about in terms of Jerusalem and the temple. And then, as Brad continued to talk to us in chapter 20, you have the parable of the wicked vine dressers. And that was where, prophet after prophet, or he said the master sends servant after servant, which represents prophet after prophet. And the people that he sent to end up killing all those servants. And so the master says, well, I'll send my son. Surely they'll respect him. The son, they do the same thing with the son, think they can get away with it. But then the master, it says in verse 15, chapter 20, verse 15, so they cast him out of the vineyard and they killed him, that is the son. Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those vine dressers and give the vineyard to others. And their reaction, the scribes and the chief priest here, and when they heard it, they said, certainly not. Right? It wasn't the whole, the comments about the killing of the servants that were sent. It wasn't about even comments about killing the son. It was, I'm going to punish you and take it away from you. And that's when they respond, no, certainly not. That can't be what it is, right? So again, they're misplaced trust, misplaced faith. And so their reaction is, no, there's no way that can happen. Contrast that with the way Jesus' disciples and say, yeah, okay, that's going to happen. Just can you tell us when and what signpost will there be that it's actually going to come about? In verse 8, so he answers their question one of the few times Jesus does. He just goes about it in a roundabout way. And actually he kind of works in reverse order. So first I'm going to tell you what it's not going to be. And their question is, well, what is going to be a sign that these things are ultimately going to come down the pipe and take place? And he says, well, I'll tell you what it's not first. So verse 8 says, take heed that you not be deceived, for many will come in my name saying, I am he, and the time is drawn near. Therefore, do not go after them. Now, what would be, in context of how Jerusalem is actually destroyed, and who does it? I guess maybe we should start there. Who destroys Jerusalem? Physically, you can say God, but you can say God. Thanks, Bob. I knew Bob. You can say God. Who is God's instrument to carry that out? Yeah, the Romans, right? We've made numerous points throughout our class about how hated the Romans were, especially by the Jewish people, and especially those subgroups like the Zealots. So, what motive would someone have during this time frame of saying the Messiah's out there? Or I'm the Messiah. What could their motive be? Obviously, it just could be just like any cult leader trying to get followers.
You surely wouldn't include destroying the temple.
No, right? But I think maybe where I'm leading, my leading question is, if you think about the Zealots, even some of the things the Zealots did during the siege of Jerusalem were trying to prod the people to action. And so some of these false messiahs might be just that, trying to prod people. Let's go out and fight these guys. They're here now. Let's get them. God's on our side. God will be with us. It's the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. It's nothing bad's going to happen here. This is the city that bears his name. And forget, Jesus' already allusions to remember Shiloh. Remember Shiloh. Their rallying cry is, come on, let's go out and get it. So that could be one of these false prophets that are deceiving the people and saying, go out, because God will be with us. I'm the Messiah's out there. Let's go out there and be with him. It's not, again, alluding back to Jeremiah, it's not unlike Jeremiah's interactions with the false priests of his day. Right? Hananiah, they had that interaction where Jeremiah comes in with the yoke of wood on his shoulders, and he said this is going to be a symbolic representation of the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar that's going to be put on the people. And anybody remember how Hananiah responds to that? Hananiah is the false prophet. What's that?
Did he break the yoke?
Yeah, he took it and broke it. He's like, yeah, Nebuchadnezzar's at the door. I can't deny that because he's right outside. But I'm going to break this yoke in 2 years. 2 years it's going to be done, right? Jeremiah's response is, amen. I really hope that's the case. Not what God told me, though. And he says, actually, that wood plank that you broke, God's going to replace it with iron. And it's going to be even worse. And then Jeremiah goes his own way. Actually, God tells Jeremiah, he's like, go back and tell Hananiah that he's going to die. So he does, and he dies within a year. And so, again, not unlike what's happening with these false teachers, false prophets, the chief priests who are trying to all draw the people into this sense of security around something that doesn't mean anything, right? And we talked about it, or Brad mentioned it last class or 2 classes ago. I don't remember. Whenever Jesus, finally died on the cross, what happened at the temple?
The veil.
Yeah, the veil was torn in two, right? We talked about how that symbolize access to God for all people. But what did it actually reveal? I agree that that's definitely symbolic in nature of what it represents. But what did it reveal?
Open the door for God.
What's that?
Open the door to God.
Open the door for God. But physically, what did it reveal?
The Holy of Holies.
The holy place. What's in there? What was actually in there when Jesus died? Nothing. There was right there. What was supposed to be there?
The ark.
Yeah, the ark, right? When did the ark go away?
When Babylon destroyed Jerusalem.
Jeremiah's day, right? Actually, if you believe the sources, there are 2 things either happened with the ark. Either Jeremiah, according to the book of Maccabees, took it and hid it in the mountain, or it's currently somewhere in the western U.S. desert where it's being examined by top men. One of those 2 conclusions. But in any case, again, you see all these different allusions back to Jeremiah preaching essentially the same kind of thing. And what happened in Jeremiah's day and with the Babylonian destruction, the same thing is about to happen. But these people can't see it. Jesus has said numerous times for them to discern the times. Pay attention to what's going on. Right? They understood their Old Testament. They understood the prophecies that were spoken of by Isaiah, by Daniel, by Ezekiel. These things aren't supposed to be a surprise if you're paying attention. Verse 9 is, but when you, these are not these things happen. These are things that must come before that. Don't go after those false leaders in the wilderness. But when you see, or when you hear of wars and commotions, don't be terrified. For these things must come to pass first. But the end will not come immediately. So again, there's just going to be all kinds of things that still go on. Life still goes on. Wars still go on. Desolations, natural disasters still happen. But that's not it. I'll tell you what it is, but this isn't it. Verse 10, and he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be great earthquakes in various places and famines and pestilences. And there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. Still not the thing we're talking about. But before all these things, so again, kind of working in reverse order, before even those things occur, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons. But who is the they in this sense? Think about the two places he says here. They will deliver you up to where? Synagogues and prisons. So who is the they that's under consideration? Yeah, the Jewish rulers who are persecuting you, the you being the disciples of Jesus. They will lay their hands on you and persecute you and do these things to you. You'll be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And again, I know we've said this before, but Luke Acts is a combo book. Does that happen in Acts? Yeah, it's absolutely fulfilled, right? Again, this is the church becoming like their master, right? Jesus does all of these things as well, and so the same is true for his people. Again, it's even for his name's sake. I like verse 13, but even when these terrible things are happening to you, that's an occasion for testimony. It's an occasion for witness. Don't shirk at it as something that's, oh, woe is me, but that's an opportunity for you to bear witness of his name that he's calling them to do. And I like this idea of comfort, again, comfort and somewhat preparation, if you think about it that way. It says, therefore, settle it in your hearts not to meditate beforehand on what you will answer. And we're always, sometimes, me especially, even think about what am I going to say if someone says this or that or whatever. Scared to death about what that might look like. But he says, don't meditate beforehand on what your answer, because I'm going to give you a mouth and wisdom, which all of your adversaries will not be able to contradict or resist. You'll be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives and friends. They will put some of you to death, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But not a hair of your head shall be lost. By your patience possess your souls. So he promises to be with them even in these times of distress, giving them a mouth to speak like God gave to Moses, going to speak to Pharaoh and the people, and wisdom with words that, again, couldn't be resisted or contradicted, like Stephen in Acts. Again, a fulfillment of this particular passage. They'll be betrayed by family, close friends. Right? Jesus has already talked about, I didn't come to bring peace, but division. Right? And so this division will even work its way back home, as he said there. And they will put some of you to death. Now this is an interesting thing. At the end of verse 16, so they will put some of you to death. Then verse 18, not a hair of your head shall be lost. Right? So somebody reconcile that for me. Jesus already said something very, very similar to this.
You'd be safe.
Yeah. No, I'm good. I've already lost it all.
No, it's one of the paradoxes of the gospel, that we may lose our life, but what we have to gain is far more eternal glory.
Back in Luke chapter 12, Jesus said to them, I thought you were telling me I had something on my head whenever you were doing that. But I got it now. Back in Luke chapter 12 and verse 4, it says, I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after they can do no more. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him after he is killed, who has power to cast into hell. I say to you, fear him. Right? Again, as we've already said, Luke 16 as well, looking ahead. There's a bigger picture, a bigger story taking place, a bigger thing, a bigger mission that you're supposed to have your eyes on. Yes, you might die, but at the same time, a hair of your head will not be harmed if you're in his care, if you're doing what he's told you to do. Then by your patience possess your souls. Other versions might say you might win your soul, but that's kind of an allusion to keeping your eyes on what Jesus told you to keep your eyes on. Enduring through these things successfully because of where you're putting your faith and your hope and your trust in him. Overarchingly, this passage, and you could say, is about trust in Jesus, putting your trust in Jesus, and that means doing what he says, because God forbid, maybe he meant what he said, and that means you better listen to it and obey. Verse 20. Yeah. Gloria.
Well, I was going to say, it's also interesting where he says, I will give you a mouth of wisdom, because he's not actually going to still be on the earth at that time. So he's implying that these things will be done through the power of his Spirit.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, he'll make other allusions to that as we go on, and even some of the other Gospels about this, the helper coming, right? That's going to, again, same words, don't be afraid about how you're supposed to answer. Acts chapter 2, you see that come out, right out of the gate with the people being, the apostles being filled with the Spirit, and then Peter speaks brilliantly, right? Peter's been this kind of bumbling guy in the past, and now he's this great orator, right? Giving this great message. So yeah, you see that right away. And then him and John being brought before the priest as well. Verse 20. Or does somebody have anything else?
Wouldn't that be parallel with the way Jesus had taught his apostles about his being taken captive, being crucified, and when the event
Yeah.
took place, they knew what he had said, but the moment and all the activity was so negative, they responded physically.
Yeah. Well, that's just our want to do, right? Is to do the same. But yeah, I think that's the calling point. Even again, back this is all encompassing in Luke chapter 6:40. A disciple is supposed to be like their teacher. What Jesus does, you can expect the disciples to do, or be asked to do. The same thing. They'll lay their life on the
Followed
line.
his example right on that spot.
Yeah.
And didn't.
Exactly. All right, verse 20. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon his people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all the nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So Luke, kind of an interesting, when you compare it with Mark 13 or Matthew 24, in those two passages, they say when you see the abomination of desolation, either surrounding Jerusalem or in the temple set up. Here, Luke actually, again, who's the audience of Matthew?
Jews.
Right, Jews. Who seems to be the audience of Luke? Gentiles, right? So these are references back to Daniel and the abomination of desolation with Matthew and Mark. Again, from a Jewish perspective, a Jewish audience, but Theophilus, as a Gentile, may not be familiar with those teachings of Daniel. So he actually interprets what that means. He says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that its desolation is near. And when you see that, what are you supposed to do? Run away as fast as you can. Right? And what's the natural inclination, especially for these people in this time, whenever there's a war going on?
Go into the city.
Yeah, go into the walled city, go into the fortified city. But Jesus is warning people that's the worst place that you can be. Whether it's because of the protection of the walls of the city, or whether it's the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. That's the object of the wrath and the days of vengeance that are coming. You can't be there. If you're there, woe is you. But you're supposed to. And again, it's another thing that's run throughout the book of Luke so far. This is a counter-cultural, a counter-intuitive thought process. Don't go to the walled city. Don't go to the temple. Go to the mountains. Right? That'd be you'd think. I watched last week. We watched The Sound of Music with the kids. And, they're trying to get out of Austria, but they're like, no, you can't take the roads. You got to go on foot into the mountains because they've closed the borders. And so this is, again, kind of counterintuitive. You would want to go to where you think protection lies, but it actually lies in this remote area. Go out and climb these mountains. Because all these things are coming to pass, which are written about previously that are being fulfilled. Again, these are references back to Daniel. You can look in Daniel chapter 12, where it talks about the destruction of the holy people. Right? Daniel's littered with that. That's the conclusion of all of these things take place, is at the destruction of the holy people. Daniel responds to that. He says he doesn't understand, but I don't think he means, I don't understand the words you're saying. It's like, how can that actually be? How can the holy people be decimated? And he tells Daniel there, God tells Daniel that you know what you need to know. Shut up the book, seal the prophecies. The revelation is the unsealing of those things, and here Jesus is revealing it. Back in chapter 17, when it's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, it says when the Son of Man is revealed, right? It's a revelation. It's an uncovering. You will see him being in this space. And he talks about how bad it's going to be for those who are kind of in woeful conditions. but then Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time the Gentiles are fulfilled. Again, a reference to Daniel chapter 9. Josephus, we won't read this, but Josephus says it's really bad. The things around the city, around the temple, got outrageous. I mean, you can read the first line. His soldiers were already quite tired of killing. They killed so much that it's just not even fun anymore for them. And now the number of those that are carried captive, Josephus records in the very last paragraph here, the number of those that were carried away captive during the whole war was collected to be 97,000, as the number of those that perished in the entire siege were 1,100,000, 1.1 million. And so how terrible and dreadful an event this was, but that fulfills what Jesus said, that you're going to be carried away, you're going to be trampled under. And another thing that's interesting, Josephus goes on to record that Daniel was talking about the destruction that was going to be coming at the hands of the first abomination of desolation at Antiochus Epiphanes. He says, but the same thing happened with the Romans. Even that's from Josephus's mouth. Verse 25, there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and the earth distressing nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and expectation of things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when these things begin to happen, look up and lift your heads, because your redemption draws near. And he spoke to them a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they are already budding, you can see and know for yourselves that summer is now near. So you also, when you see these things happening, know that the kingdom of God is near. Assuredly I say to you that this generation will by no means pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. What were the two questions that the disciples asked to kick off this section?
When and what do you look for?
And what are they talking about?
The temple.
And the temple in Jerusalem, right? So that's again the context of what's happening here. Now Jesus uses apocalyptic language to describe what's going to happen. And when you see these phrases like the sea and the waves roaring, or the Son of Man coming on a cloud, what again is that a reference to? Judgment. I guess specifically from an Old Testament reference. The waves and the sea roaring, and the Son of Man coming in power. It's from Daniel, right? Daniel chapter 7, you've got the waves and the oceans being stirred up, and what comes out of the oceans? This tumultuous sea, which is just to represent chaos and just unbridled lust for power. What comes out of it? 4 beasts. These 4 perverse beasts, right? Not even just regular beasts. They're purposefully grotesque. They don't even look like you've got a lion, a leopard, a bear, and this one kind of undescribable beast. And they're not even a normal lion, a normal leopard, and a normal bear. They've all got deformities and irregularities about them that make them not even what God intended them to be. But there are human-like figures in God's image that are the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man, that's representing what God's people are supposed to be, what the ideal of what man is. These are again references to Daniel. And when you see the Son of Man coming in a cloud of power and glory, that's a specific reference to Daniel chapter 7, which is the Son of Man actually comes up to the Father to receive his power, to receive his authority, and to receive his kingdom. And then the kind of Sunday school version of that in the previous chapter, in Daniel chapter 6, where Daniel's in the lion's den, literally surrounded by man-eating monsters. And the king comes to him in the morning, and what does he do? I'm glad you're okay. And he raises him out of the pit, and what does he do with him? Puts him in a position of power, right? He puts King Darius at that point, raises him out of the pit and puts him in a position of power, and that's what you see here. The Daniel reference, the chaos that's happening around you, and these man-eating beasts and these distorted things of what God intended, they're beyond the ability to do anything to you, because God has raised up the Son to a position of power and authority. And so when you see this happening, this judgment now coming on Jerusalem, lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near. I kind of figured this would happen. So we'll pick up here in verse 29, and we'll attempt to go through chapter 22, verse 38 on Wednesday night. 5 extra minutes, which I'll try to use well. Thank you all.